Hello. One of the things that I often get asked about, and something that comes up quite a lot on some of the posts that I put up, is about people wanting to take on a rescue dog, but the hoops they have to overcome and the challenges they face trying to get a dog from the rescues. And so I was thinking now, while a lot of the rescues are closed to homing dogs because of lockdown, this might be a good time for some of those rescues to maybe just have a think about some of their policies that might make dogs easier to home. Because of course the reality is, the more difficult I make it for owners to be able to have one of my dogs, if I run a rescue, which I don't, but I have done, then the more likely that dog is to stay in kennels, which cannot be good for the dog. So I think there needs to be a balance, a line between I am acting in the dog's best interest as well as the owner's best interest, but my priority is to, wherever possible, get dogs homed. And I think too many rescues kind of end up being a sanctuary. They're supposed to be a rescue, a place where the dog comes in, gets assessed, gets put out into a new home. But I think what happens with a lot of them is they come in and they just don't go out again. And if you look at the conditions in some rescues, and I'm not slagging off rescues, as I say, I worked in rescue for many years, but some of them are pretty kind of basic, and you think you wouldn't really want a dog to spend any longer in there than it absolutely had to. So there's kind of three key areas that I think that can be real stumbling blocks. And obviously there'll be loads of others, and individual rescues will have their own individual interpretations. But three of the ones that I would love some of the rescue centres to think more about is, firstly, the concept of we don't home dogs to people living in flats. You have to have a garden. And I'm sure most of us probably know there are dogs that kind of languish in gardens, where owners don't feel they have to walk them because they've got a garden. The dog just gets put out in the garden. The dog gets overweight, it's understimulated, under-socialised, the neighbours are complaining about the barking, there's an environmental health issue because of all the poo. But the dog never gets taken for a walk, but somehow that's seen as a better prospect than a dog who lives in a flat. Now, I've lived in flats and had dogs. One time I lived in a one-bedroom flat and I had 3 dogs. But what it meant was I had to go out like 6, 7, 8 times a day to make sure the dogs had opportunities to exercise and to go to the toilet. So when I was working in rescue, one of my things was I was very comfortable with homing dogs to people who lived in flats, because those dogs were more likely to get taken out than some dogs who didn't. So I think that this perception still, well, if somebody lives in a flat, that's that, game over, you can't have one of our dogs, just doesn't really make a lot of sense. And the irony is, we say, I'm not happy to give it to you because you live in a flat and you don't have a garden, so I'm not going to home it, and I'm going to let it spend 24 hours a day in a 6x3 kennel. And somehow we see that as better. Surely, if it's got a choice between having to stay in a kennel and only get taken out for maybe 15 minutes twice a day or whatever, or it can go to a flat that's the size of a flat and still get to go out, why is the kennel a better choice? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Home the dog. So that's one of the ones for me that I always just think, is it just me? Am I going a little bit mad? But that just doesn't seem to make sense. Another one is a lot of rescues who say, well, we don't home to families with a child under a particular age, say 10. We don't home to houses where the family's got a child under 10. Well, even families who don't have a child under 10, how many people don't know anyone with a child under 10? They never have anyone come to their house with a child under 10. They've got no relatives who've got children under 10, no visitors who come with a child under 10. That's pretty small. So if we were to restrict it to only people with no children that will ever come into their house, no children that will ever come into contact with them or their dog, no relatives or friends with children under 10, you'd never home any dogs. I think there's this fear that, well, what if the dog bites somebody? But the reality is, if you home it to someone who doesn't have a child under 10 and it bites somebody on the street or bites somebody in the park, you're no less liable than if it bit a child belonging to the family, and arguably less so, because I think the family are probably less likely to sue the rescue centre that they got the dog from than somebody else outside where the dog bit somebody. You know, we all grew up, I'm old enough to remember a time when you just went to, whatever rescue centre, you went, oh, yeah, I'll have that one. And nobody said, oh, well, do you have any children under 10? They just assumed that you would be responsible around the dog. And I've never dealt with a legal case where a rescue centre got sued just because they sold a dog to a child under 10, to a family with a child under 10. Now, obviously, if you home a dog with a really bad bite history towards children and you put it in the house with a child under 10 and it bites the child, obviously you're going to get asked, why did you choose those people? But I think there's this kind of perception that judges are so eager to destroy dogs that if you say, well, we assessed this dog as best we could in the rescue centre, the parents came, they made an informed choice that based on everything they knew about this dog, they took it home, and then some incident happened and the dog bit the child. I think it's really unlikely that the judge is going to go, right, well, you as the rescue centre, you homed this dog that you had no reason to believe would bite a child, but it did. We're holding you responsible rather than the parents. I mean, I don't know of a case where that's happened. Perhaps some of you out there do, but I've been doing legal cases and involved with legal cases for a very long time, and I don't know of a case where that happened. But I think there's this kind of myth that's out there that, we have to be so careful because what if we get sued? And I don't think many rescue centres get sued. So that's another one. I think that in real terms, it's very unlikely that you're going to home a dog to anyone where that dog is never going to be exposed to a child under 10. So what we should do is assess the individual house and the individual family. And if we look at this dog as the owner of the rescue centre and we say, well, although I think this dog could be homed into a house with a child under 10, this child is way too incompatible with this dog, then you don't home it to that family. But don't have this blanket ban that again means the likelihood is the dog spends all of his time in a kennel, which is probably not better. So many of them have real problems in kennels. They go stir crazy. He becomes less and less able to be homed the longer he's there. So he ends up then spending the rest of his life in kennels because you made it too restrictive. So I would urge you to maybe just think about that and maybe look at them on an individual case, which before you all jump on me, and I know you're all going to write it anyway, as I'm not about to say this, but I know there are lots of rescue centres who don't discriminate. Okay, so you don't need to write in and say, oh, I give dogs to... I know you do, and I know rescues that do. And I'm not directing this at you. I'm just saying it's an opportunity while the other rescues are closed to maybe have a think about some of these things. Maybe speak to some of the other rescues that are more liberal and find out how it's working for them. I'm just saying it's an opportunity for us to all kind of take stock. I'm not being critical. Then the last one I particularly want to talk about was hours of work. We don't home dogs to people who are out for more than, and the one I often hear is 4 hours a day, which is madness. How many people are not out for 4 hours a day? That's ridiculous. Most of the people who work in rescue are out more than 4 hours a day and their dog's left at home. Now, we know as an animal, left to their own devices, even adult dogs will spend around 15 hours a day sleeping. Puppies, 20 to 21 hours a day. My dogs don't sleep in my bedroom. So every night when I go to bed, my dogs are downstairs and they're on their own for 8 hours. They're not calling dog line and saying, oh, he's gone upstairs and left us. We've been here for 8 hours on our own. What they're doing is sleeping, which is absolutely fine. So if my dog can sleep on its own perfectly happily for 8 hours every night, why can't I go out and leave it for 5 hours during the day and have a dog walker who comes in the middle, or a pet sitter who comes in and entertains him, or a neighbour who lets him out? This is madness. Back when I was a boy, the kids all went off to school, the parents went off to work, nobody worried about the dog, and the dog just used it as time to go to sleep. He was able to relax. And I have said many times recently that I think, especially since lockdown, one of the reasons we've seen so much aggression in dogs lately is because they're sleep deprived. Everybody's at home, the dog gets no time to itself, and they're getting, just like we are, frustrated and irritated and angry because they're not getting enough sleep. So how is it, again, we say we can't home a dog to somebody who's going to be out for 5 hours a day. But what we will do is leave him for 23 hours a day on his own in a kennel. How is that better? On no level to me does that make sense. So instead of going into that house where he's going to be on his own for 5 hours, they're going to have a dog walker come in and walk him midway through, or a pet sitter who's going to come and sit with him. Somehow that's worse than him spending maybe years in a kennel, left on his own almost 24 hours a day. Somehow in your mind, that's a better choice. You'd rather he stayed there for years, getting less and less and less and less homeable, because you say, no, I can't give him to anyone who's out for more than 4 hours a day. I don't understand how that makes sense. So to sum up, I'm not trying to tell anyone how they should run their rescue, but we know that there are ever-increasing numbers of dogs going into rescue. Post-lockdown, we all suspect there's going to be a huge increase, a surge of dogs that were bought during lockdown who owners now can't cope with. And they're all going to come flooding into rescue. A lot of people feel very strongly about foreign rescues coming in and the competition then with the dogs that are already here. Well, we've got to make dogs more homeable then. The reason so many people get foreign rescues or buy puppies is because they can't get one from rescues. The rescues won't give them to them. But then the rescues complain about other rescues who bring in foreign dogs. Well, perhaps if you made yours easier to get, people wouldn't have to go abroad to get other dogs. So please, now just take a stock and think, okay, maybe there are some things we could be more flexible on. Maybe there's some things that we've just kind of gone along with the tide, and actually we could swim against the tide a little bit and say, why don't we just be a little bit different? And remember, the priority always is to get those dogs homed. That's what it's supposed to be about, moving them in and out again. Have a good day.